This is Remote Daily, your daily dose of inspiration. This is Remote Daily, an oasis of innovation for your mind, your soul, and your heart. Connect, act, and recharge with Remote Daily. This is Remote Daily.
Eleanor Dubinsky and Dario Acosta-Teich, and your applause from all over the world. This is Remote Daily, and we're so honored to have Lisa Beasley and Neel Doshi, two leaders, two exceptional humans in the room with us today. And that is what motivates me. So to answer to your question, Eleanor, bringing people together, I think that's my fuel. That's what keeps me running. And that's why I enjoy doing this so very much together with you. Neel, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Felix. It's great to be here.
So you just had to read a lot because there were a lot of shares. Everybody really has experience, maybe has a strong opinion, has had not so good experiences with motivation, but everybody has their thoughts on this. What stuck out to you when you read all this? Where did you see something that you want to reflect on?
Well, one, I think there's a lot of interesting things about what your colleagues or all of you put into the chat here. But one of them is how much you focused on things that were personally meaningful, that were enjoyable, that you had fun doing, and how little you talked about getting a good grade on something, getting a pat on the head, getting a promotion. There's a pattern here that I think is interesting for us all to collectively unpack as you think about the things that come to your mind when you get asked that question, what motivates you?
And being known as, the world's leading expert on building high performance culture, you just said that this morning you have all these crazy conversations with people that come to you with the most basic problem, right? How do I make sure that I, as a part of something, or the people that I have to lead, that they show up, that they do the thing they do? And we're in such a weird time for this. And the book you co-authored, Primed to Perform, is basically explaining the science behind all of this. So you're, of course, going by examples. You're taking examples from the companies like Apple, Starbucks, Southwest Airlines, and you then combine it with science and research. And this book has become a go-to place for many leaders nationwide and around the world. So to understand what your book is about, can you please explain first, what is a high performance culture? What does that actually mean?
It's a great question, Felix. I think to help answer that question, I'll share a little bit about my journey, like what got me here, because that will help you understand what caused us to even go down this path. But I'll tell you what got me here was in my very first job, I was a software engineer, and I went into it excited. I wanted to be there. Like I really thought I could make a difference. And what I found very quickly was I really didn't like working there, like at all. Like I was one of those folks that just dreaded waking up, going to the office. Like the whole experience to me it was something I really wanted to avoid. And you can imagine that, when you're 21 years old and that's how you're feeling about work, and you're looking at another 45 or 50 years ahead of you of that, well, that's a pretty dreadful thought. And I remember thinking it was me. Like, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm just not cut out for work. I left that company, started a company, and I went from phoning it in to working 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and loving every single minute of it. I didn't change. There wasn't enough time for me to change. I was the same person from A to B. Something else changed, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And it was that realization that it wasn't me, it was something else, that put me on this lifelong journey to just try to answer this question. What is the science of a high-performing culture? It's one where people simply are able to do the best work of their lives. Like that's what we're trying to build here. Lisa, it seems like that resonates with you.
Yeah, this is a subject that I wish was more talked about in the C-suite and an executive level, where we put so much focus on numbers and bottom line and metrics that they forget people are there. And so I work in diversity and inclusion, and that's one of the biggest things, is trying to measure the success of those programs. But how do you measure somebody feeling good at work? So because of my background, like as a comedian and as an actor who just so happens to be in the world of business, I get to infuse that personality in that world, and it is in dire need of creative injection and personality and fun and play, because that's how I get the best out of people and the best out of myself. Why do we want to show up at places? We've valued obligatory work as like a thing to hold on to. And I don't think life has to be that way. I think the pandemic has showed us that life don't have to be anyway. It can always evolve. And I really do have a heart for people who hate work, because the cultures that we bring people into is just like, that's the trend, is to, you're supposed to begrudgingly hate work. But I just don't think that's true. So that's why this is resonating with me already.
You know, Lisa, what you jumped on, and Felix, apologies if I'm just jumping in. Please feel free to steer this in the direction that makes sense for you. But one of the things, Lisa, you said that I think is really important is it all boils down to a very basic thought. It's hard to disagree with the statement that motivation drives performance. Like, just start with that. Like, does anyone disagree with the statement that motivation drives performance? No one disagrees with that. People get that. People get that at a pretty deep and intuitive level. The thing that I find folks have not yet learned, they've never been exposed to, is then the second order question. Well, what is motivation? If we know motivation drives performance, then what is motivation? And the work that we've done, which has been built on the work of thousands of others, part of what we focus on is really unpacking that question. What is motivation? And what it boils down to is something pretty simple. If you unpack motivation, kind of break into its constituent parts, there are actually 6 motives, reasons why people do things. Motive itself, the root of motivation. First motive is called play. Play is you do something simply because you enjoy doing it, like you do it because it's fun. Like, think about a hobby that you have, for example, something that you do where you're not getting paid for it. Maybe you're paying somebody else to do it. You're putting a lot of time into it, but you find that you just love doing it. Play exists at work too. Those moments where you feel that novelty, that curiosity, that sense of experimentation and wonder. We've had this in work. This is something that people do feel. Like, I remember at the beginning of this conversation, I'd asked Eleanor and Dario, like, what do you enjoy in your jobs as musicians? And Dario said, I enjoy jazz the most, and I enjoy it because of improvisation. Classic. Like, essentially the novelty, the curiosity, the experimentation manifests quite a lot in the improvisation of jazz, which happens to be what Dario most enjoys when he's playing music. Makes sense. But that's just the first motive. The second motive is purpose. Actually, sorry, before I go into purpose, a lot of companies are getting play wrong. They're saying it's, hey, Lisa, here's your ping pong table, or here's your foosball table. That's not what this is about. This is in the work that you do. Let's do our best to actually make it enjoyable. The second is purpose. Purpose is you feeling like your contribution.
I'm taking notes, by the way.
Thank you, Lisa. Or read Prime to Perform. And then you don't have to take notes. But look at that. The second motive is purpose. Purpose is you value the outcome of your work. Here's another one where companies are getting this wrong. They think purpose is big mission statements, and they're literally spending millions of dollars writing mission statements. That's not what this is about. The better way to think about purpose is what is its opposite. And the best opposite we can find for purpose is actually fungibility. You feel fungible, easily replaceable. You're a cog in the machine. That is actually the opposite of true purpose. Because if you feel easily replaceable, you're not actually, your work doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And so it's hard for you to value it like it matters. That's the true purpose motive. The potential motive is you value some eventual outcome of your work. So for example, imagine, this is true for any aspect of what we do, by the way. Imagine if I'm trying to lose weight. Like, let's say hypothetically, I gained 30 pounds during the pandemic eating Ben and Jerry's. This is kind of hitting too close to home for me. But let's say this has actually happened, which it kind of did actually. Now, let's say I want to lose that. Play would be the very activities I would do to lose weight I just find fun. Purpose would be there's some immediate outcome of those activities that I actually value. And potential would be I value losing weight, which is an eventual outcome. Now, there are motives that are not so tightly coupled with the work. So for example, Lisa, Felix, have you guys ever tried to get someone to do something using guilt? Have you ever guilted a loved one, for example?
Oh, yeah, I guilt my 5-year-old daughter all the time.
Same here.
Perfect. So although I find my kids do that to me and they're better at it.
Mm-hmm. I learned it from her.
Yeah, exactly. The guilt is an example of the fourth motive called emotional pressure. That motive, it's guilt, it's peer pressure, FOMO. At work, it's you feel like you need to look good to your boss. All of those various forms of emotional pressure. The fifth motive is economic pressure. Essentially, I'm trying to do something to gain some reward or avoid some punishment. There's a carrot that's being dangled in front of me or a stick that's being used against me. And the last motive is inertia, where I just don't even know why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Mm.
Now, when you unpack organizations and teams through this lens, if you want the highest levels of performance, you have to maximize play, purpose, and potential. And you have to minimize emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia. When you look at most organizations, they do the exact opposite. They maximize emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia, and they pay lip service to play, purpose, and potential. That's at the heart of what motivation is and how it relates to performance.
Mic drop.
Yeah, we figured it out.
Yeah, we're done. We're all done here, guys.
Bye.
Let's talk about something else, Felix.
See you after Thanksgiving. That was the show today.
Yeah.
Bye. We have much more for you. And actually, now we're turning the show to you again. Liz was so kind to, after Neel shared what is on the Vega Factor website, which is a survey on motivation, to transform that into a Zoom poll for you all. So Sammy is now going to start the poll for you. And if you see it popping up on your screen, we have 6 questions for you here that we would ask you to answer. All of them were thought up by Neel and Neel's team. They are basic questions around motivation. And Neel on his website has a few more finer options to vote on, but we gave you 5. Strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree on all of those questions. And we'll give you a few minutes to answer them. So take your time. If you don't see the poll popping up on your screen, you can click on the poll button that's in the menu bar on your Zoom app. And love to see the first answers coming in. And Neel, of course, who created this survey, is going to reflect with us on it. Neel, do you want to do a live comment or do you want to wait?
A live comment on the survey itself?
Yes.
What the survey is doing is one of a few instruments that we have that are all about helping either an individual or team or whole organization just understand what's going on with the motivation of their people. It goes back to, we know motivation drives performance. We know it's at the root of it. But think about this. Most organizations don't measure motivation. They don't understand their own team's motivation. At the team level, they don't know what's going on with their team's motivation. So how do you actually improve it? There's one important lesson that we've seen as we've built these high-performing cultures for companies. What you measure is one of the single strongest indicators of what you value. And ask yourself that. Imagine you took all the things that you measured, you showed them to the whole world, and that was what everyone evaluated your values by, what you measured. Would you feel good about that? Most would not, by the way. And so if you value motivation, if you want your people to be actually driven the right way to do the best work of their lives, you measure it. And that insight has been quite powerful for organizations.
Now, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but noodle on this. What if the people whose tasked with motivating the organization are not inherently motivational or fun? Or, you know, what if they're a drat? How does that, do they bring somebody in? Because I do also believe in certain things. If you got it, you got it. If you don't, you don't. When does an organization say, you know what, we're not motivating, we got to bring in?
Lisa, it's a great question. I think a few thoughts for you on that. One is some of what motivates a person is the demeanor of the leader, what they say, what they do, how they act. And that's important. There's no doubt about it. But a lot of what motivates somebody is actually built into the structures and processes of companies. How they pay, how their work is set up, how their teams actually run their rhythms. And so for example, think about it this way. Play as a construct is about the work. It's not the ping pong table, it's not kombucha, it's about the work. It shows up in what you do. And there's very little, for example, that a CEO can do in a large company to solve for play at the level of the work. So the good news is that a lot of motivation can actually be improved without having to be a super inspirational person. Now, if you're a toxic human being, that's a different equation entirely. But let's just assume that's not the case for a moment, and that you're just not a naturally charismatic person. Let's just start with that as the case. Well, that's all right, because the constructs of how do I create novelty in your work? How do I make sure that you feel like you can ideate, that you're intellectually included, that you can solve problems that matter? How do I make sure that you feel like there's a body of work that you own that really is important to you? Those are constructs that I could actually logically create without being an ultra charismatic person. And so what I would say to a leader like that is, hey, no worries. Let's start with the thing that you can start with. Now, the second thing I'd say is it's not quite the right frame to say, to solve for motivation, I have to have people that will motivate you. The more accurate way I think I would describe it is more like, I have to create the conditions that would allow you to find play, purpose, and potential and not feel emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia. You kind of have to think, if play, purpose, and potential has to come from within, fundamentally has to come from within. And so I have to create the conditions that allow you to find it versus try to apply it to you, if that makes sense.
Neel, when you look at the survey, and you look at the results here, 17 people have voted, and thank you all in the community here who took the time to vote on the Zoom poll out there on LinkedIn. We'll talk about it in a minute, what's coming up here. We have answers that are really all across the board, but I'm sure as an expert, you see patterns here, Neel. So what do you see when you look at the results? What do you see that you know, or what do you see that surprises you?
I could be missing it, but I'm not seeing the results myself.
Oh, you're not seeing the results? Oh, so it's me seeing the results as the host. Hey, Zoom University, haven't been to that class yet. Thank you for sharing that.
No
so
worries.
what we'll do is we will actually collect the results.
I see them now.
And give you the co-host role. So now when you click on live poll, you should see it, Neel. Thank you, Sammy.
So I'm looking at the poll myself. I'm guessing that only I can see it, so I'll just kind of narrate a little bit. But let's just jump straight to play. I continue to work at my current job because the work itself is fun to do. What we're trying to get at is the play motive. It's so funny because the play motive I find is the most polarizing when I talk to companies, because they think that what I'm saying is frivolous. Like they think that what I'm articulating is, so you want me to give my colleagues Legos? That's exactly not what I'm saying. It's not about the distraction from the work. It's not about the ping pong table. It's not about the foosball table. What's key to understand about play, oftentimes when an executive says to me, Neel, this play thing, I don't know about that. The thing I ask in return is, so do you think someone's going to perform better when they think their job is boring? And that usually pretty much solves the problem. Like that question more or less solves the problem. Do you think someone's going to perform better when they feel like their job is boring? Another way to put this is, a lot of folks are very fixated on employee engagement. Like my people have to be engaged in their work. And they try to find some secret recipe of engagement. Like, 3 parts kombucha, 1 part espresso, and some kind of badge that you get when you do something. The thing about engagement is if you want someone to be engaged in their work, you have to make their work engaging. That's it. That's the whole thing. Like full stop, end of sentence. You want someone to be engaged in the work, make the work engaging. And the play, what I'm seeing here from this group is a pretty high degree of the play motive. Like most would say, most of this group, it looks like 76% are saying either agree or strongly agree that play is a very big factor in why they do their work, and that's wonderful. I suspect, by the way, there's a strong correlation to coming to an event like this, learning, feeling like you can do that during the day on a Friday as part of what's likely causing this group of folks to feel a high degree of play and purpose or play in their work. But there's also some neutral disagree and strongly disagree. And so for those folks, what I'd encourage them to do is actually find a way to ask themselves, where is that novelty in their work? Where is the curiosity? Where is the experimentation? Where do they have the opportunity to learn, try, see what happens? Learn, try, see what happens? Because that's where all of that curiosity comes from. You both mentioned you have small kids. You see it all the time. They play. They do all sorts of crazy, frivolous things. They expend a lot of time and energy in all these frivolous things. But you also notice that the moment it stops being novel, they stop doing it and they move on to the next thing. That's showing you 2 things. Play is our instinct of self-directed learning, and novelty is a critical part of it.
Eleanor just brought up a really big topic that is now being discussed in the chat, which is rewards. This has been also a major topic over the past 20 months. And there was actually a recent New York Magazine article from a leaked survey at Goldman Sachs that shared that many employees actually left. And that happened after Goldman Sachs hiked their salaries, after they demanded better working conditions. So what is your take on rewards? What is your take on perks and the money that what would you advise Goldman to do on, basically?
It's a great question, Felix. It's probably the most technically complex question in the area of motivation performance. Like, how do you think about rewards?
You're welcome.
Not at all. I'm going to try to make this not sound like my PhD thesis in rewards. So start with like a basic thought. Money is not a motive. Money could be used to create motives, but it's not a motive by itself. Economic pressure doesn't equal money. So that's the first thought I'd want you to cement in your minds. The second thought is, what causes money to end up as, say, economic pressure is the degree to which you feel like it is being used as a tool of manipulation. Like, if you feel like your company, your leader, your boss, your bosses, they're using money as coercion, as manipulation, that is what actually turns money into emotional pressure, or sorry, economic pressure. On the other hand, money can go the other direction. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you 2 examples just to help you really see the nuance of money. In one transformation that we led, we worked with a financial institution, a bank, and we analyzed motivation in every role. We really tried to understand what was driving it, what wasn't driving it, where the gaps were. And there's one role that was very interesting. These are folks that are bankers for small businesses. These bankers in small business was the highest motivated role that we measured in their institution. Now, you'd say these folks are 100% commission. Isn't that economic pressure? Doesn't that feel like that? It did not. Now, why didn't it? Because they felt like it wasn't the company that was paying them. It felt like their customer was. It felt like the direction of the money was from customer to them, not company to them. And as a result, it didn't feel like manipulation. Instead, it felt like appreciation. Money, the same construct, depending on the direction it came from, went from feeling like manipulation to appreciation. And so that's why I want to start with that, because money is an incredibly complex construct, and it doesn't equal economic pressure always. Now, what are the factors that might cause it to become more like economic pressure? Systems of rating. Like, let's say, for example, at the end of this session, I said, okay, Lisa, Felix, Eleanor, Dario, I'm going to rate you against each other. I'm going to rank your performance in this conversation. And one of you is going to get a big bonus. The other's going to lose their job. Well, now all of a sudden that's going to feel like a great deal of economic pressure, because it is manipulation at that point. Like that's exactly what it is. So rating systems, ranking systems, any system that's pitting colleague against colleague, where you actually feel like you're in competition with each other, all of these will start to ratchet up the economic pressure. So what I would say to any organization that's struggling with this is, one, don't try to use money as the system by which you're getting your people to do things. Because once you start to go down that path, it will increasingly feel like coercion and manipulation. So that's the first thing I would share. Now, eventually you'd say, where does that take you? What I would say is an ideal system of pay should not be solving for getting you to perform to achieve an outcome. There are better systems for that. There are better ways to actually motivate someone to create an outcome than money. What you would want to use money for is the means to inspire someone to learn. That is really what you would want to use money for at its best.
Wow, this is such a big one. But if I think about all the, all the discussion on, like, let's say delivery, right? Jobs have exponentially grown. Like, I think New York City is now the delivery capital of the world. There have been more LLCs registered last year. I think, I don't want to get the numbers wrong, but I think the number of LLCs registered doubled last year compared to the year before. So there's more and more people moving into jobs where it's either self-employment or gig work, and they're removed from any of the systems that we were just talking about. So how can Uber, who is basically just putting pressure on, and this is just my opinion, on their drivers, how could they instead motivate? Would you have an idea for them if they called you up?
Yeah, I would encourage anyone who's thinking about the world of gig work and motivation. I would encourage folks to look at the company Grab in Southeast Asia. They're essentially the Southeast Asia equivalent of a Uber or Lyft, focused on gig workers in that environment. The way they describe it, which I think is really quite powerful, is they realize that these so-called gig workers, they're not commodities. They're not cogs in a machine, that they actually make choices that matter, that the choices that they make with the customers in their car or the packages they're delivering matter. They're not purely fungible resource. The thing that I really like about how Grab describes them is they describe them not as gig workers, but as everyday entrepreneurs, as people who run their own business, who are trying to actually do right by their customers, who are actually trying to make decisions to do right by their customers, who actually take the time to learn and grow or customize their cars or come up with better ways to actually create a moment of hospitality in a 5-minute drive. And when that's your mental model of who the gig worker is, every decision you make about them changes. And so if I were to start with what would my advice be for something like that, is think that way. If that's where your thought process starts, you will start to get motivation right. But even there, go back to the same thing I talked about money. Do these folks feel like they're being manipulated by Uber and that's what money is? Or do these folks feel like this is essentially an indicator of appreciation of the value they just created for their customer? That is the difference between entrepreneur and employee. Lisa, you're on mute.
This conversation's so loaded because now I want to know, what are your thoughts on the structures in which the systems that work for most people, that don't work for everybody, who work at places, who don't have the autonomy of entrepreneurs or self-employed people, how can they find motivation within a system where there's processes and things lined out? Because I can see why managers or leaders will get nervous at play, because that's not in the handbook. And there's steps to achieve a thing. And the first thing that it made me think of was like organizational flow charts of, it shows where you are in the system and that you can be replaced. A salesperson is a salesperson, but is it John, the salesperson? Like, I feel like the system plays into making motivation hard, because the structure isn't created to motivate. It's based off of a plantation model.
Lisa, I couldn't agree more with you. That think about this construct of fungibility. Like,
now, are you saying fungibility?
Yes.
Okay, now I know what fungibility means, but for the rest of our global audience, can you say what fungibility means?
Fungibility means something that is essentially easily replaceable. Like
Easily
we look
replaceable.
at it as commodity. We look at it as indistinguishable for the next version of it. So, for example, a penny we would view as fungible because one penny is the same as the next, the same as the next. Like I would trade a penny for you, you trade a penny for me, and there'd be zero difference in that. And so when you think about people as fungible, that's when you start to talk about those structures that you're describing, Lisa. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a very large tech organization, and they were struggling with engineering attrition. They were struggling to hold on to engineers. On a given year, at least 1 in 4 would leave, and that was usually a good year. It was almost always worse than that. And when you start to observe their structures were that their engineers were fungible. So, for example, there's a pool of engineers, work would show up, it would show up as a ticket, and the next engineer who had free time would take the ticket, work on it, and be done with it. The next engineer would take the ticket, work on it, be done with it. I'm observing that this is a setup that is designed for fungibility, easily replaceable cogs. And I remember talking to the CEO, and I said, "Why did you set up this system of extreme fungibility?" And he said, "I'm so concerned that they're going to leave that I want them to be easily replaceable. Like high attrition, et cetera. Like I don't want to have a continuity of business problem." And what I said is, the very system that you are using to solve for their attrition is creating their attrition. And that was a really, really interesting thought for them to process. And I remember sharing this on stage with this whole company, where I was speaking to their top 200 people on a big offsite, and the CTO stands up, and I'll never forget this moment. He stands up and he points to all of his colleagues, and he says, "I don't know who this random guy on stage is, but you guys need to listen to him." Because he says, "My engineers feel like short order cooks in the back of a diner. They take tickets off the wall, they make a dish, put on the counter, next ticket, make the dish, put on the counter, French fries, hamburger, soup. They never see the customer. They never see the beginning or the end. Their ideas don't matter. They don't feel intellectually included." And much of that is coming from structure. So these systems, these structures, these processes that people build into their organizations have a profound effect on motivation. Most people just don't realize that.
Neel, thank you so very much